Hello, I'm Dalton Deland. I'm a columnist for the Berkshire Eagle, and this is Eagle Reels, where we take you beyond the news. Our special guest today, Patrick White, chairman of the Stockbridge Affordable Housing Trust. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. How are you doing, Dalton? Good.
Great, thank you. Let's start just with a national glimpse. Affordable housing is in a crisis nationwide. According to a September report from the National Housing Conference, in one sample city, Asheville, North Carolina, of 269 occupations sampled, only 97 could afford to rent a one-bedroom apartment, far fewer a two-bedroom apartment. The study also notes, for example, that in Worcester, Mass, over the last 5 years, a power line worker could no longer afford a home. What is the affordable housing situation in the Berkshires right now?
I mean, clearly we need more housing. I think that the fact is that personally, I don't believe that I think there are solutions to the problems that we're talking about. And I think that as we get granular in this discussion, some of those solutions can emerge. I think that it's important um, to certainly identify what the top line problem is, but then to get granular in what the solutions look like.
Great. We will proceed. We'll definitely be proceeding to do that. So let's get right into the state. We're drawing in the circumference. Massachusetts is the fifth most expensive state in the nation to rent in. The state needs 222,000 new homes over the next 10 years to meet demand and stabilize prices. In 2024, Governor Healy signed the Affordable Homes Act, allowing the construction of accessory dwelling units. Statewide, 90,000 of them have either been built or are being developed. The Berkshire Eagle reported in October that only 6 people in the county have applied to build accessory units. It seems like a not in my backyard situation, is it?
Well, I guess you could literally say not in my backyard or not in my front yard because people will have now the right to put them in themselves. Look, I think that I'm in a house right now that my parents bought in 1960 for $10,000. They got a $2,000 gift from the local parish priest at St. Anne's in Lenox. All right, it was the original down payment assistance. And for a long time in Berkshire County, the ratio of what you made to what your house cost was about 1 to 4. My dad at the time made about $2,000 a year, and my mom made $500 a year. All right, she was a chambermaid up at Wheatley. All right, that ratio now is up in the 15, 20, 25 range. All right, and the reality is that look at when my dad passed away and me and my siblings my siblings and I inherited this house, we couldn't get 300 grand for it because initially we were going to sell it. I decided to move back from Boston and live here. And now this house is probably worth $800,000. We've seen more appreciation to this generation of homeowners than we've seen since the entirety of when there was property ownership in the Berkshires, which starts around 1720. All right. So I think we need to recognize that we got to look for ways to build and ways to preserve relatively low prices. All right, now, so we've got really kind of two sets of challenges here. One is in the rental market and one is in the home ownership market. Now, rentals are a great place for relatively low income. I think that some of them, have income requirements that can be as high as 30% of AMI. When I say as high, no more than 30% of AMI. AMI is area median income. So it's like the average of what people make in either North County or South County. On home ownership, we can currently subsidize with, let's say, a down payment assistance up to 80 to 100% of what the area median income is. So to give you an example, for a family of 4 in the town I'm in, Stockbridge, that could be upwards of $95,000. That's the current rules. Now, the state has given us a gift recently. With the passage of the Affordable Homes Act, they included Berkshire County in the as a seasonal communities County, along with the counties on the Cape and Islands. That was great for us because as bad as our housing crisis is, it is nowhere near as difficult as it is out there over the Bourne Bridge. All right. Now, one of the most important things that that does is it raises our ability to help from 80 to 100% of that area median income for home ownership to upwards of 250%, and the town can set it. So a town like Stockbridge, for example, could say, you know what, if we want to get a young family and one's a teacher and one's like a paramedic, and get them into a house and they make $120,000, well, that's still not enough to buy a house around here. But it is enough if we raise that AMI and we're able to give them, for example, down payment assistance. Now, that gets us into construction costs. All right, so for a stick build, you can build a house for somewhere around a relatively, kind of low level of finish, maybe $400 a square foot. More reasonable finish, $500 a square foot, and luxury can be anywhere from $700-800 a square foot to $1,000 a square foot. All right. Now, at $500 a square foot, even a 1,500 square foot house is $750,000. All right. But the good news is with kits and modular homes, I'm not talking about trailers. I'm talking about just things that roll up on a bed, or you get the kit and you build it yourself. We can bring that cost down significantly. I'll give you an example. A couple named the Kammeyers here in Stockbridge, Mickey and Elisa. They just built an 1,800 square foot house, including septic, including the well, for $400,000. They used college kids over the summer to assemble it. All right. They say they have a version of that that's 1,300 square feet that they can build for $300,000. All right, 320. For a tiny home, they're telling me they can build one for less than $100,000. Now, if you think about the financing, all right, for every $100,000 you have to borrow, you're looking at all in, including property taxes, insurance, a little under $800 in monthly cost. So now let's break it out by like who might, and we can talk about rental in a second. Who might be interested in these sorts of things? All right, I am the CFO at two organizations that I want to tell you two anecdotes about a little later. All right, but as a CFO of the Waldorf School in Stockbridge, I had 14 kids at McDonald's after a field trip, and I said, I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust. Okay, what would you rather have? Would you rather save some money after high school graduation if you were staying in the Berkshires and live in your parents' basement? Or would you rather live in a tiny home and spend $750 a month? And every single one of them said, I'd love to own that tiny home as a first-time home buyer. Now, if we were to basically make it easier for them to buy them, let's say we give them $10,000 down payment assistance, all right? And that gives them 10% down on that property. We have to make sure that they don't flip it to someone who wants a great, cute little tiny home on the weekends in the summer for $300,000. And that's where the seasonal communities designation allows us to deed restrict homes for full-time residents. Okay. Also, if you give them down payment assistance, you now have an opportunity to limit their upside. So let's say after 15 years, you can sell it for whatever you want, but in the first 5 years, you can only make 5% return. Now that makes a lot of sense for a first-time home buyer because they're building credit. They're getting a great house for less than you can rent a kind of just okay apartment around here. And you have something that you can call your own. And for young people, that is actually really important for a whole lot of reasons, And I think that we need to recognize that we can start to look at things like kid homes and get in for the $100,000 tiny home at $700-800 a month in mortgage costs, and a starter home that could easily accommodate a young couple with a child at around $300,000. Which would be about $2,000 a month between the two of them, or a bigger house like the one I just mentioned, the 1,800 square foot house that could easily accommodate a family of 6, that would cost, in the area of $3,000 a month. So by having different sorts of solutions, you can actually make these affordable. The hardest thing these people have is to come up with a down payment. And that's why I think the down payment, assistance, which by the way, the banks will help with too, is a really important part of this combination. The other great thing about this is it crowdsources financing. Because when you're building rentals, Lee and Lenox and and Pittsfield have done a great job at building some scale, like Brushwood, some scale apartments. But these are apartments that are costing as rentals $600,000 a unit that you got to finance. You got to find the money to do it. The great thing about home ownership is you give the kid $10,000 and they borrow 90 and they have a payment of $700 a month. Guess what? 90% of the cost of building that home is the capital that is financed by the individual, not by the government. And that's a really important part of how I think we solve this crisis.
Patrick, in an area though that is becoming, increasingly a second home market, right? With 44% historically, and now almost all of new home buys have been to out of town buyers, second home buyers. So these tiny homes, I've been very interested in that myself that you've been talking about. Where do they go if it's not, if they don't have a parent who will put them in their front or backyard? The properties themselves are, have very high value here. Where would you say people could, look for these places to put things like tiny homes and pre-built homes?
Once again, this is an easy problem to solve, all right? With just a tiny bit of zoning reform. Let's talk about zoning for a second. And let's talk about how you solve the problem you just conveyed. When you have large lot zoning in the perimeters, like Stockbridge does, that does something really good. It maintains the rural character of the town. All right. But we could implement two simple reforms that would protect that rural character while allowing us to build smaller homes at scale. So let me give you an example. Right now, I live actually on 3.1 acres that was part of the Wheatley estate. The house I'm in was built for the foreman. All right. And I am non-conforming because I'm in R4. We have 4 acre zoning in my neighborhood across the street from Tanglewood. Literally outside that window is Tanglewood. All right. And it's 4 acre lot zoning. All right. So that's good in general. Because you know what? I want Stockbridge to keep looking like Stockbridge. Same with Alford. Same with Sheffield. Same with any of these small, beautiful, bucolic towns in South County or in North County or whatever. All right. One change we could make is we could say the problem that large lot zoning creates is it encourages large sized houses. Because the only people who can afford to build on 4 acres in Stockbridge, it might cost you $200,000, is people who are going to build a very large McMansion or something like that. I don't even like that term McMansion. Someone wants a big house, more power to them. All right. So how about we say this? How about we say for a lot, for attainable housing, which is only year round, all right? So we were talking a small percentage of what would get built. How about we say that the limit isn't how many houses, how many square foot of a house you can build on one house? How about we say we can build up to as many houses as we want, up to 3,500 square feet? So you want to do a lot that's R4? Well, you could fit almost 8.5 tiny homes, 400 square foot each, with a loft that doesn't count toward the square footage on that lot. If you basically said, let's encourage small home building, which by the way is better for the environment, it's cheaper to own and maintain and heat. And so similarly, you look at the Kemeyers where they built a 1,750 square foot house for less than $400,000. How about we allow 2 of those, the 3,500 square foot limit, to be built there? How about 3 of those 1,200 square foot houses? So by basically saying, by focusing on the amount of square footage rather than the number of units, you could reform zoning for attainable housing really quickly to make the land more governable. Because going back to the tiny homes for those kids, all right, if I could build eight tiny homes on my 4 acres, that brings it down to $25,000 per home. Nice little cul-de-sac, a whole bunch of kids, or maybe some retirees who wanted to downsize. And it's a really wonderful solution for people who want to live that way. Once again, what's the alternative? Maintaining your 4,000 square foot house when you can't mow the lawn anymore, you want to downsize, it's way too much for you to clean, you've got stairs to get up to your bedroom? Or is it, the young person who kind of would rather not be in the parents' basement, sneaking somebody in and out, whatever. I mean, people want to own their own home. And when those kids told me, we don't think will ever be able to own a home, that they basically stop believing in the American dream. All right. To me, that is crazy and is a problem we can solve. And I'll say this one final thing to young people out there. You have got to become more politically involved in these local towns. Okay. I am 62 years old and I am the young half of the population in Stockbridge. And I love my neighbors and I love my fellow old people, but we have a certain perspective on these things. Maybe some of them a little bit more than mine. Mine is a little bit more progressive sometimes. But the fact is that what happens is the solutions are crafted by the people who show up. And when the only people showing up is retirees, the only solutions you have is things that work for the status quo. We're going to need to energize the people who have skin in this game. And that is young people and young couples and young families and the people who this crisis is impacting the most severely.
You make, Patrick, tremendous points here, and you just spoke to the aspirational, the next generational. What about existing homeowners? What can they do? Should people who are watching or reading this be thinking about, could they have a tiny home and so forth?
Why not? Look, I am, like I said, the house I'm in right now is the Helps house. Okay, it was built as 1,400 square feet. I live alone. I close off the upstairs in the winter. I live in 700 square feet, and it is palatial. All right, you know, the fact of the matter is that um that anybody who's lived in Boston or New York has seen starter apartments that are kind of like even smaller than this. And when you add the fact that the tiny home, if you can work stairs, so you're talking about existing people, so this might be an issue. But a lot of the layouts have lofts, which don't count towards the square footage under Massachusetts law. So you can really do more like 600 square feet, which is really similar to what I'm living in right now. This one floor of this great little, help house built for the wealthy and powerful of the Countess de Heredia and her husband, back in 1890. So I would say they absolutely can take a look at it. And I think that one of the great things about new construction is they are airtight. They are, the HERS ratings mean that they don't use a lot of energy. They're much less expensive to own and maintain and heat and live in.
Patrick, one of the things we've been seeing have been some of these hotel conversions, right, to workforce rental units. You've talked about new builds. Are there other opportunities for renovation? The kind of some of the old disused mills, on the mill streams and the rivers, anything like that. Is it affordable? Is that a direction?
No, my job is I'm the part-time CFO, Chief Financial Officer of the Waldorf High School and the Southern Berkshire Ambulance. And at the Waldorf High School, we recently renovated Old Town Hall, which was built in 1839, and then the second half of it was built in 1904. All right. The total cost of that project was $8 million. It was probably twice as expensive to build that as it was, as it would have been to build a new school. All right. So the reality is that sometimes you can't repurpose at a bargain. Now at scale, I think that what Lee is doing with those mill buildings, these old buildings have intrinsic beauty and they're worth saving. And that's why we made the decision to be in on Main Street. We thought it was great for our brand and great for the town and great to have for a town that doesn't have many kids. It was great to have those 60 high school students traipsing down to buy lunch in in downtown Stockbridge. I think that's all a good thing. But let's recognize that those types of buildings are going to work best for larger scale developments rather than the kind of organic growth based on like one at a time. Let's build 6 tiny homes and get 6 kids in them. We can do that a lot faster. And along those lines, I would just point out that you're gonna have to come up with a way to pay for it. All right. And I think there's a little bit of Robin Hooding that's to come on. All right. And I say that with one tongue firmly planted in my cheek. All right. The fact is that while I was on the select board, I think it passed 2 years ago, was the residential inclusionary bylaw. All right. Now, the residential inclusionary bylaw says a really simple thing. For every 10 new houses you're going to build, you're going to either have one of them be affordable and they never want to do that. All right. Or you're going to pay over 400 grand into the trust. So you're going to build, 10, 12, $20 million worth of houses, you're going to pay 400 grand in per house. I mean, per 10 houses. All right. So Elm Court just submitted their special permit modification application. All right. And for what they want to do there, and I think it's a wonderful project, Harvard designed, it really is, I think, much better than the Travasa project that was permitted by the board I sat on 10 years ago. That'll result in $1.7 million payment to the Stockbridge Affordable Housing Trust. All right. Now we start talking about $10,000 down payment assistance for a tiny home, or even 25 or 50,000 for a family's home. You can do a whole lot of those for $1.7 million. And I think the town should really, you got to start with the money. You got to think of what's my plan and how am I going to pay for it? All right. I think that right now with the federal landscape, it's going to be harder in the short term to attract even state level money because of the crisis in the state budget caused by the idiocy at the federal level in terms of like some of these policies. I hate to be political, but that's my opinion. So for me in the short term as the chair, I'm focusing on these organic home ownership models that I can do one at a time, trying to convince the town to say, give us a little bit of flexibility on zoning when it comes to this attainable year-round housing, and let the folks who have the means pay for the lot that you want them to have to buy, with the current zoning, and keep the character of the town intact. So, I think that starting with the financing makes a lot of sense. And I will say this, I think that towns need to regionalize their approach to affordable housing trusts. And I'm as a chair of the Affordable Housing Trust in Stockbridge, where we have 600,000 coming in from DeSisto and 1.7 million if the current board approves the Elm Court project. You're talking about millions of dollars, and that's just for special permits. You also could do a residential inclusionary bylaw for subdivisions. For every 10 subdivisions, you're going to have to pay 75 grand into the trust or something. All right. Other towns that put in place a residential inclusionary bylaw, I think we should pool our resources and look for the best available property and not limit it to these tiny towns, but rather say, where are the opportunities? I mean, because let's say one last point, a Stockbridge parent or grandparent, all right, who has a kid that just came back from college or graduated from high school and wants to enter the trades. All right. That person if that family, those parents are in Stockbridge, they don't care if their kid buys in West Stockbridge or Great Barrington or Lenox or Lee. They just want their kids to be local. All right. I have paramedics at Southern Berkshire Ambulance who 25 out of the 30 of them commute an hour or more away. All right. We're not building enough houses for these working class folks here. And for the folks who want to stay in the Berkshires, let's make it a little easier for them to do so.
So let's say you joked about, but of course it's true, some of the age of the existing long-term homeowners. Let's say that adult child is not coming back, but let's say they're empty nesters and they've got a house with extra room. What is the feasibility of zoning and construction renovation to either give a second entrance or enable homeowners to rent out a nice room or suite?
No, I'm a lifelong Democrat, and I believe very strongly in relatively progressive policies. I will say this though, the exact policies that protect renters in Massachusetts, which I am strongly in favor of, all right, are easier to manage by professional companies in the rental space. I would have a hard time personally recommending to a friend of mine who was 65 or 70 or 75 to do the right thing and start renting out your house or build an ADU at $200,000 to your expense. Because if somebody gets in there and God forbid, and this is only maybe 1 out of 50, or I don't know what the statistics are, but somebody is in a position to take advantage because of the renter protection laws of that elderly person. And it's one thing if you own 50 units, you build into your business plan that 1 or 2 of those might have like someone who's not going to pay the rent, and maybe that's because of a legitimate reason, like they get hurt or something changes in their life, or maybe it's because they weren't necessarily the most honest person to start. But the large scale property management company that rents apartments is going to have a lot easier time absorbing that than, let's say, the one-off ADU builder who all of a sudden, if the person isn't paying the rent, can't pay the mortgage on the ADU.
You're giving, tremendous advice for us, and it is, we've gotten to that granular in a wonderful way. Beginning our dismount here in this terrific conversation, I'm going to paint downside and upside. Down, downside, if we do not make the kind of changes that you're talking about, and things continue in this track where affordable housing is not there sufficiently for all of the workers, all the healthcare workers, all the firemen, all the teachers, and so forth. 5 years from now, is there a breakdown in services? What's the downside, and is that even a possibility? I'll get to the other side of my question, which is to say, what gives you hope? Are you essentially optimistic that the kinds of
Still
things?
the negative person, end on the positive.
Okay.
All right. So I spent 10 summers summering in Provincetown when I was living in Boston. All right, great town. All right. And I met a guy named Reggie Cabral who owned a couple of bars there. And he was, when I was at 25 and he was nearly 80. And he had pictures on his wall of Elizabeth Taylor behind the bar at the A House in Provincetown, tending bar, back when it was an artist colony in the 1950s. Bartender didn't show up one night, Elizabeth Taylor shows up and pours the drinks. All right. There's something, in Ars Amatoria by Ovid, he talks about how power loves beauty. All right, this is the time of Jesus. All right, this is way back 2,000 years ago in Rome. Right, it's always been, and seasonal residents have discovered the beauty and attraction of the Berkshires, and I think that's great. Okay, you have to only go 30 miles west of here. I'm sorry, east of here or west, and look at the hill towns to see how communities struggle without the influx of the cultural and tax base. 4 out of 5 of the dollars in Stockbridge are paid by seasonal residents. We just passed a new high school that's going to cost this town, I don't know, 40, $50 million over the next 20 or 30 years. And 4 out of 5 of those dollars are going to be paid by seasonal residents who will never send a kid here. We have the best deal going. And by the way, for my friends who are electricians or dig wells or do whatever, or paint houses or build houses, these folks support local trades and have for the last 150 years. It has always been like this. But there's been a secret sauce and an equilibrium that works. Going back to the Cape, we already know what happens when you don't figure these things out. That's why we have the seasonal communities legislation, is it's in such a crisis there. A friend of mine from the Cape, who spends a lot of time in the Berkshires, I asked him, when was your town like Stockbridge is now? And it took her a second to answer. And she said 20 years ago. All right. So we have 20 years from where we are now to where it completely breaks down if we don't figure this out. And guess what? For all those people who blame the second homeowners, yeah, well, the second homeowners don't vote. And these are political decisions controlled by locals, and the locals have to get off their proverbial ass and make some decisions that are in their own best interest. Because that's how you solve this crisis, is you roll up your sleeves and you look at the challenges one at a time and you figure out the compromises and the solutions that protect the character of your town, while giving people like me and the Affordable Housing Trust and the people who want to do this, and young people and young families, options that they actually keep them here. Everybody talks about, oh, young people leave the Berkshires. Well, how about we also market the Berkshires so that young families come here? At any given time, General Dynamics has 1,000 open jobs or more. All right. A lot of people would rather not raise their kids in an inner city 1,200 square foot apartment. And if we had solutions, would like to raise them in the beauty with the trails and the outdoors and the smaller classes and the great schools and all the things that the Berkshires offers. We have so much to offer people. All right. How about you don't need to get 100% of the people who would see an ad marketing the benefits of raising your family in the Berkshires. I grew up here. I know how great it was. All right. But that's not to say we don't have problems to solve. When I was at Monument Mountain, there were 350 kids from Stockbridge at Berkshire Hills, K through 12. Today, there's about 100, 105. And out of that, 65 are in 7 through 12, and 31 are in in 1 through 6. All right. That means that even in the next 6 years, we're going to have half as many kids if we don't turn this around. All right. Stockbridge, my God, I live in the town that is the home of Norman Rockwell. All right. There's not a more iconic artist representing American values and families and kids trying to run away and having Chief Opie on the stool talking to them and the whole 9 yards. All right. And I don't want my town that I grew up in and that I love to become a caricature of itself, remembering its glory days from the 50s and 60s, while we become a town that can't even function because there's no one to run the boards and no one to work the jobs and no one to teach in the schools and no one to live. The one good thing during COVID was was the seasonal residents moved out here and they brought with them, it was a tight squeeze, but they brought with them their kids and their grandkids. And for the first time in 30 years, Stockbridge felt like the Stockbridge I grew up in during COVID, because we had all these kids running around the streets of Stockbridge in all these second homeowners' houses. So you know what? I'm actually quite fond of the mix that Stockbridge has. It's about half and half. I love the fact that my taxes are really low, thanks to them. And I love the fact that my friends have jobs, thanks to them. And I love the fact that, you want to live here 6 months in a day, you get a vote. But the only people who get a vote are the ones who live here 6 months in a day. And they're the ones who have to own whatever solutions we come up with or whatever problems we decide to ignore.
Patrick White, I've not only enjoyed this, I've learned a lot, and I think our viewers and readers will as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, man.
Viewers, readers, conversations like these are how we keep the spark of journalism and the Fourth Estate alive in America. If you're already a subscriber to the Berkshire Eagle, thank you. If you're not yet, please consider becoming one. I'm Dalton Deland.
I'm a subscriber, and also donate to the Journalism Fund. It's
Thank
really
you.
important. Thank you.
I'll see you next time
Bye-bye.
on Eagle Reels in the pages of the Berkshire Eagle.